My stalker neighbor became my biggest nightmare. So our story begins in springtime of this year. I'd been living at my apartment for about 8 months at this point, and it's always been a very safe neighborhood. The only somewhat unsafe part that's happened here is that there's been a couple of car thefts, but that's unfortunately become the new normal living in the metro city area. One day I'm hanging out with my best friend and we decided to go and grab a bite to eat. So she ends up driving, and as we're leaving my neighborhood, there's a two-way stop on a pretty busy intersection. We're waiting to turn left, and then suddenly this car comes turning left in the opposite direction of us, coming in at full speed. So basically he was just turning into the opposite direction of us on the road that we were on. As he is approaching our car, this man locks eye contact with us, slams on the brakes, stares a little bit longer, and then slams on the gas again and just speeds away. Something in my gut told me to keep an eye on this man and gather as much information on him as I can. As I'm turning around in the passenger seat to gather some information on his car, he quickly pulls a very tight U-turn and then speeds back towards our direction again. He pulls up directly to the left of us in the lane that's supposed to allow for oncoming traffic to pass, rolls down his window, and proceeds to start screaming at us, cussing us out, and waving his fists up in the air. While he's doing all of this, I can't help but think to myself, sir, you look like Popeye and your face is freaking me out. I was able to gather the make and model of the car. It was a small black one, and it also had a pink interior, which was bedazzled. And as Popeye was screaming at us, he had a disco ball hanging from the ceiling right next to his head. During our interaction, this man just kept yelling, motioning for my friend to roll her window down. She kept saying no, which visibly made him more mad, but eventually sped off due to oncoming traffic. What happened next left me living my life in fear. Like and follow for part 2. My stalker neighbor became my biggest nightmare. Part 2. Fast forward to about a week and a half later, this interaction definitely left me uneasy, but I quickly forgot about it. One day I was getting in my car to go to work, and as I was reversing out of my parking spot, nobody was there. I have a 180-degree rear view camera, so if anybody is behind my car, it automatically starts yelling at me. Even though I did look over both shoulders as I'm halfway out of the parking spot, it starts yelling at me, so I quickly pull back into the spot. But nobody was there. After waiting there for a while and nobody was coming, I slowly started to pull back out of the parking spot, and there he was, strategically and perfectly hiding behind a truck, staring me down with that big old disco ball right by his head. I tried pulling out of the way, but he quickly pulled up directly behind me, got out of his car, started screaming at me, and cussing me out all over again. So I quickly drove off. In today's day and age, especially as a female on her own, you never know how somebody's gonna end up behaving, especially given this man's very erratic behavior. So I'd rather just avoid the situation and stay safe, so I drove off. The next day, as I'm driving back home, about to turn right into my neighborhood, there I see his car parked on the side of the road about 50 feet from the stop sign. As I'm about to turn, we lock eyes, and I just see him reach over and put his car in a drive. At the last second, and mind you, he also knows where I live, I decided that it would be best to just continue going straight and not turn right into the neighborhood. As I do so, this man pulls out directly behind me and starts following me. I slammed on the gas, and he started doing the same exact thing. I'm taking all these weird turns left and right throughout the neighborhood, trying to lose him, but there he is in my rearview mirror directly behind me. Go to part 3. My stalker neighbor became my biggest nightmare. Part 3. So eventually I was able to lose the guy, but I was just way too scared to go home because he knew exactly where I lived. I played his game back at him, and I parked my car in a different parking lot that was pretty well hidden from sight. It got to the point where my boyfriend had to park outside the building in his car just in case anything were to happen as I'm leaving for work. In this process, shortly after I leave, he sees a similar car driving around the building suspiciously, so he follows after him and tries to get a license plate number. Over the next couple of weeks, I saw his car driving around a few more times around my building, so I was just fed up at this point and decided to take matters into my own hands. I want to figure out exactly where he lived, what building he was living in, and to give a perfect description of his car. Eventually, I found him. This man lived on the complete opposite side of the apartment complex, and mind you, it's a really big one. This man was living on the very front end of the apartment complex, and I'm on the complete opposite side on the very back end of it. This means that he had 2 points of entry into the complex, so it made absolutely zero sense for him to go completely out of his way to go to the back end one. Obviously, this man had a lot of issues, so I just tried my best to stay vigilant. The hiding my car trick must have worked because I haven't seen anything happen since June of this year. So really the biggest takeaway I can give you from all this is always try to be attentive and never trust anybody unless you really know them, especially if they're your neighbor.
I got back at my cheating boyfriend by flirting with my dad. Story time. So me and Steve were dating for a few months before I started to suspect that he was cheating on me. He would very often hide his phone and be unavailable at the most random times. And then when I'd ask him where he'd been, he'd have no explanation. So one night when he was staying over at mine, I looked over and I could see Steve talking to a girl on Facebook Messenger. Which, come on Steve, we've moved on from Facebook Messenger now, babe. So I knew that Steve was in a Facebook group for bikers. And I thought that is the perfect place to get revenge. So I created a fake profile. I used a profile picture that I generated using AI. Next thing you know, I'm accepted into the group. I was going mad, sending friend requests to everyone in this group to make it look more real. And then to make it look like I actually gave a shit about motorbikes, I just posted some random pictures that I found on Google. And what do you know? Less than a week later, I get messages from Steve. He started the conversation by saying he'd literally never seen a more beautiful biker in his life and that he wanted to meet up with me. And I just thought I'd see how far he goes, so I told him that I had a boyfriend and he instantly replied that he had a girlfriend but nobody needed to know. And after that, it all got very explicit very quickly. And I just went with the flow of it all because I was gathering evidence. And then whilst all this was going on, another guy called Nick messaged me. New character unlocked. He was also in this biker group, but his profile didn't have a picture of him on it. And his page was also set to private as well. He started off by asking how I'd been and I replied just saying, well, I found my boyfriend was cheating on me, so I'm pretty shit actually. And he responded so nice, he really built me up and encouraged me to leave him. So the next day, I confronted Steve with all of the evidence that I'd compiled from him cheating with me. And of course, he tried to put the blame on me. We ended up in a massive argument and now he is blocked on everything. I ended up speaking to this biker stranger about it. This man was so attentive. He texted me every single morning telling me to have a good day. And as the conversations went on, we started to get more and more flirty. We were adding spice, if you know what I mean. One day he asked me if he'd like to meet up with me. So we arranged to meet in a little cafe at the weekend. And I was prepared to live my Bella Swan fantasy, you know, like riding on the back of a motorbike, feeling all dangerous. Okay, so let's fast forward to the weekend. I had already texted Nick and told him which table I was at in the cafe. So I'm sitting there feeling all cute or whatever. And I see a very familiar motorbike pull up in the car park outside. Nick then proceeded to walk in the door and with his head down, he walked directly to the table I was sat at. So when he got to my table, he took his helmet off and standing in front of me was my dad. And all he said to me before walking away was, please don't tell your mum.
My manipulative wife forced me into an open marriage so she could sleep with her affair partner, so I'm thinking of divorce. Last year my wife Dee told me she thinks she is bi and would like to explore having a relationship with a woman. This came as no surprise to me, she had shown signs of it in the past. I asked her if she wanted to explore as in a hookup or a real relationship, to which she replied an actual relationship. She felt she had so much love to share and giving it to one person was not enough. I said I wasn't on board and I thought the subject was closed. Well, about 4 months ago, Dee brought it up again and said she would be happy with just an FWB arrangement, not an actual relationship. I was still hesitant, but it was a constant topic that kept coming up. Eventually, after enough pleading from her, I relented under the conditions we do our research, books, podcasts, and see a couples counselor before opening up. Dee was ecstatic and we dove into several books and found a great therapist, trying to do things right. One of the topics our therapist brought up was why we were opening up and if there was someone either of us had in mind. Dee admitted that she had someone she had been talking to who had encouraged her to open our relationship. This was a shock to hear for the first time and our therapist said this was troublesome. After that first session, I confronted Dee and asked if she had done more than talk to this friend and she swore that was all they had done. I asked to see her phone and she unlocked it and handed it to me. She had been talking with Kim for about a year but there wasn't anything incriminating and no apparent gap in the messages, just a two-way crush between them. There was a message from Kim right before this last polybombing episode where Kim said for Dee to initiate intimacy with me more often to soften me up. What I did find was 3 dating apps with Dee's profile on her phone. This caused a brief argument about jumping the gun, with Dee agreeing to delete the apps until after we were open. 3 months go by and we are getting closer to opening and Dee is acting like it's Christmas time. Our last counseling session we went over our agreements and boundaries and we got down to our messy list. Co-workers, relatives, close friends, exes, and I wanted to add Kim to the list. Dee blew up especially when our therapist said it was a reasonable request. Dee wouldn't speak to me on the way home but when we got there she let me have it. I even showed her in 2 of the books we had read, where it said opening for a specific person was a bad idea. I basically said it was a line in the sand for me, I would be just as happy remaining monogamous. She got mad and slept in the spare bedroom and would hardly talk to me for 2 days. Finally, she gave in and agreed to Kim being on the messy list and we were officially open. Today Dee told me she had a date tomorrow and it seemed a bit quick to me. While she was in the shower I decided to check her phone but the unlock code had changed, that's 2 red flags. Later on she got on her phone and I saw the unlock code. Well, tonight I looked at her phone, the dating apps were still gone and there were messages between her and Kim trash talking me and planning their date. There were also references to having intimacy again. I emailed screenshots to my phone. I feel like a chump right now. My manipulative wife forced me into an open marriage so she could sleep with her affair partner, so I'm thinking of divorce. So my wife ended up going on a date with Kim. I did not confront her beforehand, I figured waiting till the next morning was the better option. Well, she got home from her date with Kim earlier than I thought she would and wanted to talk. But I went to bed and told her we could talk tomorrow. Her eyes were all red and her makeup was all smeared, and her hair was messy. I knew they had intimacy, and it ate me up a lot that night. The next morning started off on a negative foot. I asked her if Kim was worth throwing the last 5 years into the gutter. Then I started reading aloud some of the texts where Kim and she were planning to open our marriage and hook up again, as well as some of the disparaging remarks about me between them. And so when I found all this out, I started preparing for a divorce, as in my mind I see no comeback from this. Dee broke down when I was saying this. She took a few minutes to stop crying, then said she was still very much in love with me and didn't want a divorce. She wanted to go back to our marriage counselor and work things out. I told her I couldn't be married to a liar and a cheater, and she was the one who burnt down that pledge and now we just need to move on. But Dee refuses to accept my answer. She is determined to win my trust back and show me how much she still loves me. She says that our therapist can help us. Well, I stewed on it all night and part of the next day, and I came up with my answer. Then I called a lawyer and had him start drawing up divorce papers. The lawyer was a peach. Not only did he put a rush on it, but they served Dee at our house just 2 hours before her next date with Kim. Attached to the divorce papers was a printout of the last texts I read to her. She found me sitting on the patio, and I told her again that we are getting divorced. But she still refuses to accept it. She still went on the date with Dee, by the way. This was 2 days ago. My wife is begging me to change my mind each second of the day, but I'm refusing to budge. Update 2. My manipulative wife forced me into an open marriage so she could sleep with her affair partner, so I'm thinking of divorce. Okay, I'm throwing in the towel fully. So after the last 2 counseling sessions, Dee finally admitted she cheated and lied about her affair with Kim, that it had been going on for way longer than I suspected and that they found ways to hide it even if I went through their texts. The fact that it is true hurt me a lot, but the fact she still doesn't show any remorse or that she feels like what she did was wrong, that hurts more. She still tries to blame me for being controlling and dragging my feet on opening up. So our last counseling session I gave her an ultimatum. 1. Back to monogamy, no contact with Kim, no divorce. 2. She can keep Kim, separation and divorce. But Dee thinks we can work out option 2 and still keep Kim. I told her I felt like Kim instigated all this and her presence was a deal breaker for me. I'm still being love bombed at home and pressured to give in to her desired outcome. I have been quietly looking at condos near downtown with the thought of moving out and letting her have the house for the next 6 months until the lease is up. I told her I wasn't going to Thanksgiving at her family's this Friday and was going to my parents Thursday without her. I said to tell them whatever she wants, but I was telling my family the truth, which upset her a lot. She begged me again to change my mind and to celebrate together, but I said no. Her sister texted me asking if anything was wrong, and I told her that Dee had an affair with another woman and we were getting a divorce. My hope is to be out before Christmas. If she spends the night or the weekend with Kim, I can be out before she realizes. My entitled nephew took my car without permission and crashed it, so I'm making him work to pay it back. My nephew is an only child and to be honest, he's very spoiled and entitled. Part of it is definitely down to my sister raising him the way she did, coddling and babying him all his life. I do my best to be a good uncle, but it's hard when my nephew, who is 16, screams and yells that his birthday present is not expensive enough, or that the shoes you got him were not the brand he wanted. Me and my sister have butted heads in the past regarding my nephew's entitlement. But I learned very quickly that this was going to accomplish nothing. I remember distinctly on one occasion my nephew insulting my girlfriend's parents because they were broke and could not afford to give her a luxurious life growing up. My girlfriend was not there, but my sister was. When I berated my nephew for saying this, my sister jumped in and started ridiculing me for being mean to him, telling me to grow up and pick on someone my own age. So the biggest issue I have ever faced with my nephew came recently. He turned 16 not too long ago, but he has yet to get his license. Despite not having a license, he demanded a car for his birthday. Apparently having a car would motivate him to get a license. His mother bought him a car, but apparently it wasn't good enough for his standards. So what did his sister do? Well, she called me up and demanded that I buy him a better car, of course. I laughed at this suggestion of hers and hung up. I got a call a few hours later from her, stating she has talked with her son and he has come up with an idea. So my nephew's idea is, instead of me buying him a car, I could buy a new car for myself and give my current one to my nephew. Once again, I laughed, and my sister tried her best to convince me that I should do this. Of course, I kept saying no, and she was getting progressively angrier and angrier, and ended up calling me a selfish a-hole before hanging up. I thought that was that. For the next few days she did not reach out, my nephew did not reach out, and I did not either. I was fully ready to go low contact by this point. But a few days later my nephew, being the entitled idiot that he is sometimes, decided to have his way either way. So, I woke up to the police call informing me that my car had been stolen and crashed. It hit a pole and it was very heavily damaged. The police asked me to confirm my license plate and what do you know it, that was indeed my car. I failed to put the 2 and 2 together yet, and I was asked to come down to the police station. I arrived and I asked who the man who did it was. They described him as a teenage male with dark hair, very pale, wearing almost all black. They showed me a picture and my jaw dropped. It was my nephew. My effing nephew. The first thing I asked was if the man was injured, and the police informed me he was miraculously all okay, all he suffered was a sprained wrist. I filed a report and went home. My sister proceeded to show up at my house unannounced an hour later or so. She demanded that I don't press charges on what had happened. I asked her how she knew what my nephew did, and she told me she got a call from the police station this morning and she went to go bail him out. I told her that her doing stuff like this is the reason that my nephew is so spoiled and entitled, and I told her that there is no way I will be dropping charges. We argued about it back and forth for a bit and I gave my sister an ultimatum. I told her that there is two routes we can take. I can either continue pressing charges, or my nephew can get a job, and give me every cent from his paycheck until I have enough from his work to buy the exact same car for myself that he crashed. My sister tried to put up a fight, saying this isn't fair, that he's just a kid, so on and so on. I kicked her out of the house and told her that she may call me to let me know her and her son's decision. Within the next 24 hours, my entitled nephew took my car without permission and crashed it, so I'm making him work to pay it back. So my sister ended up caving and calling me within the 24-hour period I had told her to. The first words out of her mouth were not her telling me her nephew's choice, but it was her complaining and trying to dissuade me from doing anything once again. I let her know, once again, that I won't be doing that, and stated that facing the consequences of his actions is good for my nephews, and that maybe it can teach him some responsibility. I told her she either decides or I press charges. Then I hung up. Hours later I got a call from my nephew, and he was just as insufferable as ever. I got no apology from him, no sound of guilt either, rather him telling me that I am being petty, that I'm a selfish person and that no good uncle would ever press charges on a family member. I was astonished. The entitlement of his was truly revealed to me then and there, and I told him that I'm going to hang up. I told him he can call me back in a few minutes after he has calmed down, and if the first words out of his mouth were not "I'm sorry," then I would press charges. I hung up, and a few minutes later he called back. This time, he did apologize. I'm not sure that it sounded sincere, but it was better than nothing. I told him I accept his apology, but he has to face the consequences. He asked me about the other option, specifically how long he would have to work to replace my car. I told him not to worry about the workplace as I would be able to get him a job, and were he to choose to work part-time on the weekends, it would be roughly 15 to 20 hours per week. My car would cost around $5,000. We crunched up the math and figured it would take roughly 20 to 25 weeks worth of work. I told him that is a lot, but the penalty for theft is years in prison. I told him he would be a fool not to choose the work option. I also told him this will be his first job, I would take him under my wing and would guide him in this job, and that he can learn responsibility. He was actually very receptive to this and he told me he would like to do that. This phone call actually went a lot better than I was hoping. As far as I know, he's writing his CV right now.
Story time about how this guy was cheating on his girlfriend with me. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 10th grade. And one day one of my friends, Josh, decided to expose this kid named Caden because this guy Caden posted on his Snapchat story, "Anybody who's 14 and younger, unadd me. I find it so weird that you little girls are swiping up on my stories calling me cute." So my best friend Josh decides to expose this man and he's like, weren't you just hanging out with a 12-year-old the other day? Make it make sense. So, I only add Caden because I was going to tell him that he's gross and disgusting for hanging out with 12-year-olds. But after he sent me a picture of his face saying hi, I immediately fell in love with this man. I know this looks bad. Trust me. I know. Anyways, when I started talking to this kid, I really thought that he was on some fuckboy type shit. He was actually super sweet and really kind.
Bruh.
Like, he never asked me for nudes or anything. He also told me that he was single, so him and I start flirting. And y'all, I really thought that this man was about to be my husband. Now, of course, I low-key doubted him a little bit, so I ended up taking screenshots of every one of our messages. Well, him and I had never actually met in person, but we did have plans to meet up that weekend. So a few days before him and I are supposed to meet up, all of a sudden he literally went ghost. I didn't hear from him all day. And then when I go to Snapchat him, bro has me blocked on almost everything. He had me blocked on Instagram as well, but he had 2 accounts on Instagram and he forgot to block me on the one. And Instagram really snitched on this man. Because when I clicked on his Instagram, it had the suggested accounts. Some girl with a profile picture of him and her popped up. And she had their date in her bio. They have been dating for a whole fucking year.
Don't be shocked. You're shocked? You're shocked?
So obviously I'm gonna tell her that her man was cheating on her, but whenever I add her on Snapchat, she immediately sends me a message that says, if this is about Caden, I don't want to hear it. So instead of talking to her about Caden, I literally just sent her all of the screenshots from these past 2 weeks that him and I have been talking. The only thing I said after that was, he's been cheating on you with me. So then she literally just responds with a video of them and she's like, okay, thank you. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I personally wouldn't stay with him, but to each their own. Anyways, so fast forward, they're still together and I'm still blocked on everything.